As everybody is aware, we are running the meeting both online and in person, and if people who are not speaking, if they can have their online mute buttons on. The meeting is also then recorded and live streamed in accordance with Regulation 22A. On today's panel, we have two parts to our meeting. We have parts B and C, which deal with different membership. At the start of our meeting, we're dealing with part B, which is members for the City of South Perth. So I'll give everybody who is here present. To my furthest left, we have Councillor Glenn Cridge. Next to, Cridland, sorry.
That's all right.
That was a bit of a faux pas then. Next to him, we have Councillor Bronwyn Ward. Yes. We have Member Brian Curtis. To my immediate left is Member Tony Arias, Deputy Presiding Member. My name is Francesca Lavanti. There is one apology for today's meeting. It's listed in the agenda, and there are no members on leave absence. The minutes for this meeting will be available on the website. Members, can I have a show of hands if you have duly considered all matters before you on today's agenda? That is unanimous for the minute taker. Members, are there any disclosures of interest? There are no disclosures of interest. Our first application is Form 1. It's item 3.1, and it's a proposed childcare premise. We have two presentations in person for that, and we also have officers from the City of South Perth. We will move to the presentations in the order that they appear. You can change the order if you wish. If for presentations, you will need to sit in the front of the table here, and your presentation will also be live streamed. So the first presenter is Raj.
Yep.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep, Raj. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the presiding members for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Rajai Ohab. I'm one of the owners and the operator of the childcare under the name of Panda Early Learning. Long day care supply and demand. As of July 1st, 2024, the gap maps analysis of supply and demand for long day care facilities in Como and South Perth revealed significant shortage. There are only 623 childcare places available for over 1,632 children aged 0 to 5. This effectively means that Como families are traveling outside the suburbs to drop off and pick up their children, which adds significant commute and logistical challenges to the parents' daily routines. New long day care facilities needed in Como. So in the Como area, most long day cares are in old or rundown buildings, not purpose-built centers. The new childcare center we propose is greatly needed in Como. There are several reasons that parents might prefer this new childcare. The first one is the safety and security. So the new facility will have modern safety features and childcare proofing measures, which older buildings may lack. Quality environment. So our purpose-built childcare center will have updated amenities like modern kitchen facilities and playground equipment, providing a better experience for children that families in the community will appreciate. Positive work environment. A new facility can create more positive workplace for staff, which benefits the children they care for. Community preference. Families in Como are likely to welcome a new childcare center that meets modern standards and provides safe and enriching environment for children. Going to the community engagement aspect, our experienced team ensures stability and builds trusting relationships with both children and parents, contributing to comforting and support community environment. We will encourage family involvement through the events we hold throughout the year. These events foster a sense of community among families and provide opportunities for parents to connect with each other. We will create educational partnerships with nearby schools to enhance their educational programs. These partnerships can provide access to resources and expertise, and that benefit both children and the broader community. Employment and training. So Panda Early Learning Center significantly contributes to the community by supporting families in the pursuit of employment opportunities and a better work-life balance. We have long-standing experience in supporting moms of children, students from local schools, and the community by offering workplace opportunities and training for new and existing educators. In conclusion, Panda Early Learning brings a wealth of expertise to the community of Como, being a childcare provider that meets the assessment and rating of the Education, Care and Regulatory Unit, ECRO. Our services significantly enhance the well-being and development of children, offering parents peace of mind.
You'll need to close your presentation. We're at 3 minutes.
Yep, this is my last sentence. Therefore, we respectfully request the staff members to approve our application. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go to our second presenter before questions from the panel. It is Ben Laycock.
Good morning, panel members. I'm the applicant's consultant town planner for this item. This proposal is for a 2-storey childcare facility which will cater for 76 children under the age of 5 and will be supported by 14 staff members. Significant effort and time has been invested by our project team to address the city's evolving planning framework following the Gazettal of Local Planning Scheme number 7 earlier this year. From an assessment perspective, a childcare premises is a discretionary land use in the residential zone and is therefore capable of approval. The proposal has been designed to be compatible with the surrounding residential character, both operationally and in built form, and is conveniently accessible for families. 19 car parking bays are proposed at the rear of the site as required, and these have been designed to also accommodate on-site waste collection. Whilst the proposal results in a landscaping shortfall, all efforts have been made to provide landscaping in prominent locations. Pleasingly, the officers have looked at the landscaping holistically and have acknowledged the thoughtful design of outdoor play areas, which the local planning policy would ordinarily not include. These areas have purposefully provided natural elements that are otherwise not mandated and include numerous trees and plantings, whilst also avoiding artificial turf. The proposal has been assessed as consistent with the applicable local planning policies and supported by technical documents from acoustic, traffic and waste consultants. We do acknowledge that the transport impact statement does contain some inconsistencies with respect to the final set of plans, and these are simply a result of numerous revisions throughout the process and can easily be rectified through a condition of approval. Importantly, however, these revisions will not alter the findings and, if anything, reflect favourable edits such as the removal of small car bays. The swept paths for waste vehicles have also been checked on the latest plans as part of the waste management plan that was prepared by the same consultant.
Is this a drill? There's no drill coming on.
An incident has been detected in the building. Please prepare to evacuate and wait further instructions.
You just have to hold the presentation.
I just mute it.
Yep, well, I'll move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a seconder? It is seconded. Seconded because there's a fire alarm and we have to hold until such time as is resolved. All those in favour? It is carried. We're now recommencing the meeting. It is 9:50 a.m. Would you like to continue with your presentation?
Yep, no worries. So almost finished what I was wanting to say. The final point that I wanted to say was that I just wanted to correct some commentary that's on page 12 of the RAR, and this is in respect to the noise assessment and fence heights. Seemingly the report has overlooked that we did supply supplementary acoustic information, which is contained at attachment 6 of the RAR, and this demonstrates that the proposal will comply with the noise regulations based on a fence height of 1.8 metres, and this is consistent with what is shown on the plans for determination, and section 5, page 2 of that supplementary information sets out that the modelling was based on a 1.8 metre high fence height. We've otherwise reviewed the conditions that are recommended by the city, consider them to be reasonable for the proposal, and we'd just like to thank the city for its favourable recommendation and seek the panel's endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to officers, members. Members, do you have any questions to the first two presenters before we go to city officers? Yes.
Member, just been clarification, the acoustic assessment, the 1.8 metre fence, it's still masonry, or is that?
We're proposing Hebel panel fencing. So the acoustic report didn't require any specific fencing type. The city's policy seeks masonry fencing, and so we've proposed Hebel panel fencing, which will give the masonry look, but given that from an acoustic perspective, we don't need any specific fencing. Yeah.
The second question was around the landscape. You made a comment that it's below the landscaping requirement.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't take into account the playground area, correct?
Yeah, correct. So the city's policy says that it's 10%, and that doesn't include any of the outdoor play areas. So if you exclude the outdoor play areas, I think we were just under 5%. But obviously, if you were to include it, then yeah, it would be well over 10% of the site area.
And there's trees planted within that playground area.
Yeah, both on, we've got trees planted on the ground floor, and there's also going to be trees in pots on the upper floor play area as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this juncture? Yes, thank you.
My question is in respect of the first presentation, but it may be appropriate to be answered by the second presenter. And the first presentation, as I understood it, was about the quality of the application, or sorry, the proposed development rather, and unmet demand. And is it the proponent's position or submission that unmet demand is a relevant planning consideration for us to take into account in determining whether or not to exercise our discretion to allow the this is a discretionary use?
Yeah, so one of the I guess points to address under the relevant local planning policy is that there is demand for the facility. The officers asked us to go and prove that there was a need for a childcare premise in this location, which we did.
And just following on from that, I listened to the first presenter and read his presentation about the, or at least the assertion that people from Como drive out of the area to go to childcare places to drop off their kids. I've read the submissions from local people, and a thread that goes through that is there's a reference to there being 12 local childcare centres within 2.5 kilometres, 11 of which have vacancies. So how does that fit with an unmet demand in the area?
So in one of the responses to the request for further information after the submission period, we went through that and provided the city with data as to, I guess, the vacancies or lack of vacancies in those facilities. So the data that's available to us does not align with what the residents put in their submissions.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. I have a question, probably to yourself, Ben. The material in our info that we've been provided has 2 sets of DRP comments, and then there's some commentary in the report. I'm interested in you providing a little bit further comment about the design, noting that there are a series of areas that the DRP talked about. Can you talk about those comments and your responses to those, just the modifications?
Yeah, so we met with the DRP pre-lodgement, and they had flagged a number of quite a number of issues which we worked to address. And then in the second DRP, their main concerns were around sustainability details and also landscaping. The comment in respect to landscaping was just an issue in how documents were uploaded onto the city's portal, because we had to upload documents for the DA itself, but then separately for the landscape, for the design review panel. So the landscaping plans weren't available at the design review panel because they hadn't been put into that portal. So they hadn't considered what we had actually presented. In terms of sustainability, we included solar panels on the roof, but in terms of other elements, we feel that they're more appropriately dealt with as part of the detailed design when you look at glazing, all of your internal fixtures and things like that, which we're happy to do. And I know that there's a condition or recommended condition that would require a sustainability report.
And my last question is about land use itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like you to provide us a comment about site selection.
Yeah.
I know that we've got some information on our package that shows what's previously there, that's development covering the 2 sites,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in proximity and surrounded by residential.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the site selection and why this site was chosen as being most suitable from a planning perspective?
Yeah, so part of that question, I guess, would probably be better answered by the clients as to why they chose this particular site. But from a planning perspective, the city's local planning policy has locational characteristics that are required to be met in terms of, proximity to schools and other, key amenity features, which this proposal does achieve. Obviously, being a corner site, it makes it easier to design it, with things like parking and access. And so, yeah, we're able to achieve a lot of the requirements in terms of setbacks and the like by having this corner site in this location.
Thank you. Those are my comments. Is there any other comments at this juncture from panel members?
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I just remembered one other question. Thank you. And that's, again, this is just from reading through the submitters' comments. There's a reference in several of their submissions to the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority and National Quality Framework, which is a very long term. And there are assertions made by the submitters that there are certain levels of staffing required for 76 kids under that particular standard. And their assertion is that there's a requirement for 14 staff.
Yep.
And I note that the proposed approval says that there will be 14 staff, 76 kids. So my question is, does that mean that there won't be any non-care staff or administrative staff also at the location? And if there are, will that mean that there will be a shortfall in staffing under that standard for 76 kids? No,
so it's certainly my understanding that it will be 14 staff that are on site at any one time to cover the requirements of the legislation.
I have no further question.
Any further questions for panel members at this juncture? If not, we will go to the officers. Thank you. We will go to the officers from the city. morning. Officers, would you like to, one, introduce yourself, and two, make any comments either on the RA or in response to anything you have heard today?
Thank you. My name is Fiona Mullen. I'm the Manager of Development Services at the City of South Perth. Scott Van Island is the Senior Planner of the City, who is the Assessing Officer, and Scott will be providing a very short presentation this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, members. The City of South Perth has assessed the proposed childcare premises at 78 Railway Avenue, Como. The site is situated with a proximity to within a predominantly residential area characterised by single and group dwellings. The city's assessment supports the built form and land use of the proposal, subject to additional information and operational details being provided. These requirements stem from revised specialist reports aimed at addressing existing inconsistencies within the application and outstanding operational matters. Whilst it is the city's preference to resolve these issues upfront as part of an assessment of a development application, the applicant was notified of these necessary details, but did not wish to provide any information upfront. This information is commonly provided as part of a detailed operational plan for the centre post-development application. Consequently, the city has recommended a set of conditions designed to ensure the functional operation of the centre and preserve the amenity of neighbouring properties, as well as the predominantly residential character of the area. To this effect, the city is requesting the addition of a further condition as part of the RA, which we're looking to supplement for condition 18, in addition to the already proposed conditions. We have copies of this we've prepared to provide the panel, but I will read it out now. So new condition 18. Prior to or in conjunction with the submission of a building permit application, a revised traffic impact statement prepared by a suitably qualified practitioner shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the City of South Perth. Recommendations as contained within the report are to be carried out and implemented for the lifetime of the development to the satisfaction of the city. The applicant has been provided with a copy of this condition this morning.
So that replaces?
It is in addition to, and we're recommending it is inserted where the current condition 18 is.
So that becomes, so we'll move everything down to 19, 20, etc.
Correct.
And
I have copies.
yes, if you can provide copies to members, because they would not have seen that.
Right.
I may apologise on behalf of the city for providing that late condition. It was an oversight. It is referenced in the report, but not added as a condition. So we apologise for the late addition of that.
Thank you. Just get them handed out so members have it inside of that. So would you like to continue?
Yep. The proposal has been assessed and on balance it is considered that the scale and nature of the proposed land use and built form are consistent with the existing development within the locality, and accordingly, subject to the inclusion of appropriate conditions, the application is recommended for approval by the city.
Any further comments? Thank you for your presentation. Panel members, does anybody have any questions to city officers? You can also, if you wish, go back to earlier presenters.
I had three questions, if I can remember them.
Yes.
Madam Presiding Member, in respect of the exercise of our discretion as to whether or not to approve this particular development and use, does the city staff have any comments on what the presenters have said about unmet demand and the way they have dealt with that issue with the city? That's the first one. Secondly, whether or not the non-compliance with east and west setbacks, I think, will impact on whether or not the development will be seen as overwhelming in bulk and scale. And the third one was in respect of the exercise of our discretion for this development and use. Did you take into account the loss of 2 residences from the City of South Perth, given that we have a significant housing shortage? Those are my questions.
Yep. So if I may break that down, I'll probably start with the setbacks, if that's okay. So you're correct, there is a setback technical shortfall to the east, and there is also a technical shortfall to the west. I'll probably start with the west. As part of this, there are some minor intrusions of some roof projections, including with the truncation area on the corner. These are likely what I would refer to normally as a technical variation and likely imperceivable as viewed from the street. One notable projection within the street setback area is the bin store, in which the city has recommended a condition of approval to require additional landscaping to be installed in there to help screen that bin store from the street. As the bin store is a functional component of the development, it is required, and having it actually a contained structure of masonry construction to a high standard of the remainder of the development is likely not to have a streetscape impact. In relation to the adjoining eastern lot boundary setback, the city has assessed this and believes it meets the design principles of the art codes in terms of providing articulation of the wall and a variety of materiality facing that residence. In relation to the removal of 2 residential dwellings to facilitate a childcare premises, the city has the property, under local planning scheme 7, a childcare premises is discretionary use and is capable of being developed on this land. Whilst the loss of residential dwellings in this capacity is, broadly not in line with the state's objectives, a childcare premises is a wide service for the community, and on balance, it's appropriate in this location. And that is reflected in the site's zoning and its discretionary use. So if you might repeat the first portion of your question, my apologies.
Yes, the outstanding question was in respect of the presenter's comments on unmet demand and how they dealt with that issue with the city.
Thank you. So as part of the city's assessment, we did request that information was provided in terms of the existing demand for childcare centres and the existing location and proximity of centres to the site. The applicant has provided a relatively comprehensive analysis of the demand in the area, demonstrating that there is a need in this location. Whilst the city's policy does mention providing a need for a service in this area, a need to provide a service is ultimately not ordinarily considered as a planning consideration for the site. And the onus of providing a functional business is on the service provider in that case, in terms of if they've done their due diligence and the viability.
Those are my questions.
Any further questions?
Sorry, can I just add one to that as well? And I note that you have provided the recommended condition 18 in respect to the provision of a traffic impact statement. Can you just confirm whether the city has considered the safety element in respect to that traffic? I do note that the traffic report that we've received so far has said that there have been, I think, 6 traffic incidents in that location within the last 5 years in that specific location, and particularly having regard to the fact that it's opposite Penrose College but in a very close vicinity to 3 local schools, and that the likelihood is with the operating hours, the peak periods for the childcare centre are likely to also coincide with the school start and finish time. So has the city considered the safety implications for children?
Thank you through the chair. Yes, the city has fully considered the safety impact of the proposed development as part of the assessment of the traffic impact. The condition really just requires an updated traffic impact statement. So the city has been in receipt of information in relation to traffic emanating from the development. It was just, and it is supportable on that basis. We just felt that we needed an updated survey.
Any further questions? Yes.
To the chair. With regard to the comments received, obviously there was quite a lot of concern about the dropping off of children and the extent to which the parking would be adequate. I understand the arguments with regard to the standards. I'm wondering if you actually looked at the experience of other childcare centres, either within your administration or elsewhere, as to whether or not they demonstrated to be working well against your standards.
So the drafting of the city's local planning policy for childcare centres and our non-residential local planning parking policy, in terms of coming up with those ratios, we did review other local centres and also across the greater Perth region in terms of what ratios have been used and where these ratios come from and the rationale behind that. So the ratio of bays that have been provided is consistent with the general expectations and demand of these centres, noting that throughout the day there is a significant reduction to demand parking, with the exception of those drop-off and pick-up times, which are generally quite time limited in terms of collecting a child and then leaving. There's not much lingering or staying in place with those bays, with any meetings normally occurring during the core business hours, not the drop-off and pick-up periods if there are any visitors to the site. So we have reviewed the functional characteristics of parking. We do believe they're appropriate for the site.
Yes, another question?
Just in relation to that, again, there was some concern that, as with all childcare centres, provide parking internally, but for someone wanting to get to work and in a hurry, the extent to which they're going to drive in and try and manoeuvre internally, turn around and come back out, versus parking on the street. So with regards to parking on the street, can you just speak a bit about what you've assessed in terms of the potential for parking on the street and impact on the traffic?
So as part of the traffic impact statements that's been provided, there has been ratios in terms of traffic movements for the site. These have been reviewed internally by the city's engineering department, and also against the characteristics of Murray Street and Murray Avenue in terms of the carrying capacity of the roads. So the roads do have the capacity to accommodate the additional traffic generated by the site. In terms of on-site parking, this would be as any other development along the property. If there is a future requirement in terms of no stopping or yellow line marking, the city can review this as an operational process moving forward.
Could I add a supplementary point or question to that specific question about the street parking? And whilst I acknowledge the road has capacity, I'm interested more specifically about its locational consideration, given it has a roundabout at it. So as I say, I appreciate that the road has capacity when you take the whole road, but I'm interested about impact at that location, particularly at the roundabout, for parking on the street and the impact that it has on traffic flow. So if you could expand on that particular element of your analysis.
Yeah. So in terms of the location, it probably boils down to the vehicle access location to service the site. Being located further towards the north away from the roundabout, it's not an expectation that there'll be parking between the crossover to services development and the roundabout itself. So again, I believe there was line marking down there that prevents no stopping and standing in that location to that effect. And the crossovers location and vehicle access point is the furthest point from the conflict point being the roundabout in terms of vehicle access. So any cars queuing or something to enter and exit the site would likely be parked before that point, not in the point between the crossover and the roundabout. Does that help address that question? My apologies.
It does. And on what basis did you say that they're likely to park not closer to the roundabout, essentially?
So I believe there's currently a line marking down that street that prevents parking between the roundabout and that crossover.
It's on that basis.
Yeah.
Do you have any further questions?
Only that I was thinking more in terms of Rory Avenue, because there was comments that that may be the street that if people are going to park on the street.
So in terms of Rory Avenue, again, same. So the functional entry to the site is off Murray Street, but you're correct. If people do wish to park on the Rory Avenue portion, effectively there would be nothing preventing them from doing that. However, we're assessing the development on its basis, and it has met the car parking ratio requirement for the site. We have conditioned the car parking management plan to be provided as part of the condition of approval for this site, which should address some of the functional entry and exit elements, or if there is any requirement for time limited bays or a procedure to notify parents dropping off children, the operational procedures of the facility.
Okay.
And my final question for you is locational question, location and site characteristics. I've got your policy in front that talks about 5 points in terms of childcare premises and the location characteristics. I note that the report refers to the discretionary use as acceptable, given that that are based on scale, positive contribution to the street, complementary to residential, and in close proximity to Penrith College. There are a number of other comments, a number of provisions in the policy. Is this policy written where these are an and or is it expected they should meet all 5 of those locational? And if so, any further comments you have?
The policy is written as an and or,
Okay.
and the policy itself is ultimately discretionary, with the head of panel governing the land use being the scheme and the discretionary use afforded to the site.
Thank you. Any other questions from panel members at this juncture?
Only a clarification. Obviously, the RAR does allude to the fact that there should be a condition revising the TIA. Has the applicant been advised of?
The applicant has been provided with a copy of that this morning, and I would encourage a question if there's any issue relating to that directed to the applicant.
Okay.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, appreciate your comments. We will now move back to the agenda. We have a recommendation in the RAR. We also have some additional material provided through today's presentation. I will now ask for a mover of the RAR recommendation as contained at the beginning of the agenda. Is there a mover of the RAR recommendation? There's no.
No, I'm presiding
It's
member.
moved, Tony. RS.
Move the RAR
As written.
recommendation with the inclusion of it says recommended condition 18, but
Okay, so for the minute taker, it's being moved with the recommended, or with the additional condition 18, which means that the remaining conditions, including as written in the RAR 18, will all be renumbered accordingly. Is there a seconder for the RAR? It is seconded. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
thank you, presiding member. In terms of the land use, childcare premises is a discretionary use and therefore capable of being approved within this location under the town planning scheme. In terms of the locational characteristics that have been discussed through the meeting, it is a corner location. It has streets on both sides, which is beneficial from two perspectives. One is dealing with potential amenity impacts, so opportunity to minimise, but also to deal with traffic management in a much more positive way. And it's diagonally opposite Riley Reserve. So I think in terms of minimising impacts within the residential area, particularly adjoining properties, I think it's an appropriate location. I think the scale of the proposed building, even though it's two-storey, is not incompatible with a residential area. And the DRP actually made some positive comments about its context. So from that perspective, I think it's appropriate. The TIA concluded that minimal traffic impact and the surrounding roads are certainly capable of dealing with the additional impact. And the acoustic report also indicated that it would comply with the necessary regulations. So from that perspective, I think the normal amenity issues can be appropriately managed, particularly with the recommended conditions. So on that basis, I'm prepared to support the RAR recommendation.
Would the seconder like to speak to the item?
I would just endorse what's just been said. I do appreciate the sensitivity of this kind of development within a residential area. I have looked very carefully at the submissions received from the residents, and I can understand the issues that have been raised. But I am satisfied that the DRP have thoroughly assessed the design, and I do think it's a well-conceived design on what will be a prominent site. The TIS I found slightly less convincing, but the proposed condition I believe will handle that. And I can understand the residents raising some concerns, given this is a busy location. However, I do believe it is a use that is appropriate in that kind of location, and I'm satisfied that the conditions that are proposed will adequately deal with the amenity impacts.
Thank you. Are there any speakers on the motion? Any speakers against the motion? Yes.
Right, I'd like to speak against the motion. I have two concerns. One of them is my colleague, Councillor Cridland, has raised in respect to the scale and bulk. As you know, the residential zone typically lends itself to residential type developments, and those characteristics are naturally sympathetic with the landscape. This particular development is a large two-storey building that dominates two relatively large residential lots on a corner. The corner location increases its dominance and reduces visibility of surrounding traffic, and represents a form of development that is not consistent with the surrounding largely single-storey residences that are there. Further, it does have a notable lack of landscaping and reduced setbacks that not only adds to the bulk and scale, but causes the development to sit quite prominently against the residential backdrop. So the bulk and scale of this development, in my view, are more akin to a commercial development. And whereas I do appreciate that childcare centres do need to be located within certain residential areas, these areas do need to be selected carefully, and the development must be of a size and scale that does not put it akin to a commercial development. The second concern that I have, as I raised earlier, is in relation to safety. I do note that the traffic expert states that the low traffic generation of the proposed development is unlikely to impact traffic safety in the area. However, 6 crashes on a local road at this specific location over the last 5 years is significant. The location is in close proximity to Penrose College, Collier Primary School and Como Secondary College, meaning that there is likely to be a significant number of pedestrian and cyclist school children within the vicinity. And it should be noted that the peak hours of childcare centres tend to coincide with the peak hours of schools, and in this regard, being close to 3 schools on the corner of Penrose College, the concern to traffic-related incidents involving school children is significant. So I'm not certain that this is able to be overcome due to the location. This is, as noted, a discretionary use, and given the comments by the design review panel, together with the expectations of the residents in this locality, it is my view that the bulk and scale of this development and the safety issues, it's not a location of which a development encompassing 76 children is appropriate. So in my view, this form of development is not appropriate in this location. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Is there any other speakers on the motion? Yes, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. I've got a number of comments in respect of this application. Some are positive and some not. Starting just with my notes, I think it is disappointing that we will lose 2 residences from the city. We've been given targets by the state government to increase the number of our residences within the city by a significant amount, and this will make the task harder. I noted the comments made by the presenters about traffic. I know this particular area well. I live about 500 metres away from it, and I drive past that roundabout every day to walk my dog, albeit before peak school hour traffic arrives. So I thought I'd have a drive past it this morning just to see how bad it was with the Penrose in particular traffic. And in the future, it will be worse with the Como high traffic when the Murray, Henley, Jackson Street is opened, as it will, because it's been planned to open for about 60 years on our road network plans. The traffic on Murray Street, in my view, notwithstanding the dated nature of the traffic report, can deal with the traffic. Parking is an issue, as was raised in the questions. There are yellow lines down Murray Street which prevent anyone from lawfully parking there, and that's necessary because it is a busy street in this area. So people would try and park in Wyrie. When I have a look at Google Maps and when I drive down the street, they're going to find that difficult because there are so many crossovers. So people will have to park. Yes, it will be a bit of a pain. And this is a large centre. Under our previous scheme, Town Planning Scheme 6, there was a cap of 30 children. Now that was taken out in our new local planning scheme. So now we've got larger centres being planned, and this one is obviously more than twice the size of our previous capped centre, which also explains why some of the centres were in older buildings and not many are in new ones. Although I also take issue with the first presenter about them being old and dated. In my experience, having visited them, they are pretty good. And one of the benefits that they have over this development is that there is more outdoor fun, natural environment for them to play in. So yes, they may not be as new, but I think if you're a kid and you want to get in the dirt and play in the sand and have some trees and a swing, I think there are benefits in older, bigger blocks. But there are also new ones which are large, such as Jellybeans, which is perhaps located a bit better than this one, which is opposite Como Primary School. It's a similar size, and in one respect, I think it's more attractive than this one. This one is fairly bland, black and white colours. I was criticised in my support of Jellybeans because it is so bright, and I think childcare centres should be bright and fun, but that's not a reason to approve or not approve an application, of course. I'm not really convinced that there is demand. I think there is something in the fact that there are vacancies at 11 of 12 of the local centres, and we have another centre to be approved. Well, it came before council at the last agenda briefing last week. But really, is demand an issue for me that I can take or at least give any significant planning consideration weight as a planning consideration to? In my mind, no. So I'm not going to give that much weight. I think it is positive that it's opposite a park. I think it's positive that it's fairly close to Penrose, albeit principally a high school rather than a primary school where you would think that there would be more demand, such as Collier or Curtin primary schools, which are close by. I think they would have been much better locations with much more demand. I also, when I first saw this application, I thought, wow, 2-storey, that scale is inappropriate in this area because it is a fundamentally residential area. So again, when I had a drive around, I was surprised because how I'd imagined the area was a little bit different. There has been an increasing number of modern residential developments that are 2 stories in Ryrie, for example, in particular. So I don't think it will be as out of place as I had initially thought. I can understand the local neighbours not being terribly happy, and I can recall how unhappy the people were who live next door to Jellybeans, in particular how annoying it would be to have laughing children and bright coloured building. I think in retrospect, they probably now realise that it wasn't quite as bad as they thought, and it provides an important service, at least Jellybeans, to the Como Primary School. Bearing all of that large, I know it's been a bit of a word soup or a vomit of thoughts, noting that there are some warts on this matter, as I have said, in particular the loss of 2 residences, I will still support this application.
Thank you for the comments. I will speak to the item. I have reviewed all the materials that have been provided. I am comfortable that the information has been provided and the proposal as designed is consistent with the planning framework and the policy position, in particular the orientation of the building towards the street and the intersection, which has such a and the design and frontage that face that intersection, I think, is acceptable and appropriate. The locational context has been provided and clarified through today's meeting, and I'm satisfied that it does meet the policy position, and therefore there is discretion that is available to us to make determination on it. In relation to the parking at the rear, This is a good use of both the space and also the access point coming directly in off the street, providing an opportunity for the design of the building to be moved towards the intersection and providing a nice good frontage to the intersection. I'm comfortable with the design and layout of the parking is compliant and appropriate in its location. In terms of the play area above the parking area, the information that we've provided is that the proposal is acceptable and that the acoustic treatments are manageable. I'm also satisfied that the hours of operation that's been provided as part of this proposal are consistent with the local area, noting that these facilities are generally quiet on weekends and evenings, and predominantly residential areas most active in those residential areas. There definitely is going to be some movement in the street. However, from the information provided, it's not so significant as to warrant a refusal, or that the streets either themselves can't be capable of development, aren't capable of the movement, or treated in such a way as to manage that movement. The intersection has a roundabout provided in it, which will naturally provide a level of control within the street. Overall, I'm satisfied that based on the information provided and the assessment that's been undertaken, the proposal is acceptable in its locational context and of a form and scale that is also consistent with the planning provisions for that site. Those are my comments. I move back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Just a couple of comments in closing. There's been some discussion around locational characteristics of the site and whether it's appropriate for childcare premises. The RAR indicates that it's consistent with the local planning policy, and we heard this morning from the city's officers that in their view it meets the criteria. So from that perspective, from a local planning perspective, it seems to comply. There's been some discussion around bulk and scale. Two-storey building is not incompatible with residential area, and more that's occurring and will occur within this area. And interestingly, the DRP, which is an independent group, found that it was appropriate. We've also, the RAR reinforces that both the traffic impact statement and the acoustic assessment found that this proposal complied. So on that basis, I'm happy to support the RAR recommendation.
Thank you. That is right of reply and close of debate. We are now going to the vote. The vote is as written in the RAR, inclusive of the additional condition 18 that was provided today. All those in favour? Against? Is carried 4-1 for the minute taken. It is 10:33 a.m. and we will be changing members. So thank you, members. Nice to meet both of you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm amazing.
Get that on my phone.
Yeah, that's good.
Thanks.
Thank you. See you.
I was hoping the rest of my team was coming in with me,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if they ever want to come in. Oh, okay. Do you just want to really decide?
There's quite enough chairs with 4 of them, so.
Oh, yeah, true. No worries. Oh, okay.
We can share.
Oh, there's other chairs. Counts. Let's see. Yeah, just up to the left.
Great day.
Good morning, members. Councillor Peter Melrosa and Councillor Lindsay Miles, can you see and hear us okay?
Right.
Yes, thanks. Welcome. Is that both of you together or just yourself?
I am here by myself, but Councillor Melrosa he was definitely watching online a minute ago, so he must.
Thank you.
He's online, just promoting him to panelists.
Oh, okay.
But he's declining. Councillor Melrosa, we just need to promote you to panelists. It should pop up with a request. If you can accept that one, please. Okay.
You had me panicked there for a minute. I couldn't see why I wasn't getting invited, but I'm here now. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Peter Melrosa. Welcome.
Thank you.
We are now about to commence part C. Just before we commence, I'll just seek your clarification that the late material that was received this morning for item 3.2, which is in the form of a modified RAR recommendation. Have you both received that this morning?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Members, you've both received that additional material this morning? Great. Thank you. Okay, for the minute taker, it is 10:37 a.m. We will commence part C. Members, can I have a show of hands that you've duly considered all matters before you, including the additional material? That is unanimous for the minute taker. Members, are there any disclosures of interest for today's meeting? That is nil. We have our full panel today on both online and in person. We have 2 items. We will deal with the items in the order in which they appear in the agenda, dealing first with item 3.1, both A and B, which relates to lot 9109 Graham Farmer Freeway and comprised of 204 multiple dwellings and private recreation. We have a number of presenters for both items. We will deal with the presenters first, being Mr. David Reid and Mr. Chris Dwyer. At that juncture, we'll have questions from panel members, and we will then move to officers from the city and then officers from WAPC in relation to item 3.1 A and B. Over to the presenters.
Happy for you to bring up the presentation now.
Yeah.
If you'd just like to introduce yourself. Okay. Just for those parties that are online, the request was for a joint presentation and the request is for a combined 5 minutes and it has been approved.
Madam President, Member David Reid from Element. I'll be going second, and Chris Dwyer from MJA, the architect on the development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for everyone's time this morning. Thank you to the specialist members and the Town of Victoria Park councillors online. This is a very important project and we see it as a very exciting project for the Burswood Point redevelopment. We've been working very closely with the city over the last, and with the client for the last 14 months to get us to this point today. So very excited again to be here. And we'll just take you through a very quick design synopsis of the process we've been through and how we arrived at the proposal as it sits before you today. We're looking at lot 305, 306 at Burswood Point. This is the second stage of recent approval on the adjacent lot 307, 308. The site response is very much related to the broader master plan and the LDP in place, hierarchy of balancing form with precinct aspects through to the foreshore and the river beyond. we've been through a process with the town's design review panel, looking at how you may start massaging and responding to the site constraints, views, breezes and the adjacent form, both the townhouses in the foreground and the adjacent successive apartment tower sites, understanding how we may start to manipulate the heights and the setbacks of those forms to create a cohesive and logical progression as you pan around the racecourse. We've taken a lot of inspiration from the natural site constraints of the peninsula, how the river has eroded and changed the form of that peninsula over time, also understanding the section through and the sedimentation of the river and the forms that are presented via that process, along with the natural bird life and flora and fauna more broadly. And then we've overlaid that with the racing history of the site, looking at some of the forms of the existing grandstands, be they the protective undercroft spaces and ways that we can respond to that, looking at the horse's gait while it's in the racing formation, and then also that photo finish that you get that's synonymous with the racing, you get the staggering that it comes from that. Then we start thinking about how that narrative, we can weave that through the built form, looking at the modulation of those two tower forms and how the podium responds to the adjacent future townhouses across the street. We start overlaying that layering and that staggering and that undercroft spaces before then working through some materials that respond to both the reflective river and the sand of sedimentation, which then leads us to some of these forms and spaces which respond to announcing entry points, providing that protective undercroft spaces, along with that staggering of the photo finish with the undercroft layering there, which links back to the river, as well as some of those townhouse interfaces of that podium where we start breaking down that form into smaller pieces responding to the height and scale of the adjacent dwellings or future adjacent dwellings. Also looking at how the form and the language responds from distance, not just up close, how it sits within that broader master plan and the broader succession of towers as they happen on that peninsula, from both the Perth Racing Grandstand as well as the mainland's potential. And then we've had a great relationship with the Town of Victoria Park, which has resulted in a recommendation for approval. And we've also been endorsed by the town's design review panel, having been to 2 meetings, that panel there. And more broadly, we feel that this is a highly approvable scheme. We're broadly in excess of the requirements of SPP 7.3, Design WA, in terms of apartments and the dwelling design. And just, I guess, broadly, we see it as a great outcome, and thank everyone who's been involved to date. That's the conclusion of our formal presentation. Dave and myself are available for any questions as they may come.
Yes, Madam President, remember, the information is pretty much taken as read. I don't actually have a lot of value to add. Everyone's, I'm sure, across the recommendations that we've got. It's a good development in any city location where we should be having density, and we're happy just to take questions from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from panel members at this juncture to the applicant?
No, thank you, Presiding Member. David, you would have obviously seen the RAR and two probably predominant issues that come up in terms of compliance, or one relates to height and one relates to plot ratio. Can you, I think there seems to be a difference of opinion in terms of how that should be assessed. I'd sort of like a bit more response to height and then perhaps plot ratio.
Through Madam Chair, I'm happy to take that question to start off with. Yeah, it depends on which RAR you actually read as to what the height actually is. It's 22 stories or 21 stories is the height. I think it's 22, but it depends on how you calculate that story, whether the mezzanine's included or not. And I think that's the difference in the height calculation. So that's for one tower because the mezzanine is included, but under the current scheme, but under the Town of Victoria Park scheme, that it no longer forms a story as part of the definition. And it doesn't add any bulk or scale. It's just the split level of the mezzanine allows for more parking without adding any extra bulk. The structure plan was originally done in 2013. It had a height of 13 stories in it, but it was in a much bulkier building. It was one big solid building across the development. It was also much deeper, whereas those sorts of buildings, they're just not acceptable in today with apartments WA. The design approach that MJA has taken of actually having 2 more slender towers and opening it up provides more daylight and articulation through the building, views through the building, separation, more cross-ventilated apartments, better solar access. It's actually a better design outcome to get that additional height. But in terms of, and plot ratio wise, the original structure plan had a plot ratio of 5:1 in it, and we're at just over 6. But that design that it was based on actually had subterranean car parking that actually went out underneath all the roads as well. So that was the design concept that was done by the Foster and Partners master plan that underpinned the overall structure plan for the site. We just can't build car parking under roads when you've got services, and the town of Vic Park don't want to accept liability and all sorts of things, which has resulted in a more podium parking, and that podium parking is then now included in the plot ratio definition. So it basically adds 1:1 of plot ratio is basically tied up in that parking scenario. But it's not an overdevelopment of the site. The structure plan had 200 apartments designated for the site. We're at 204. It's within cooey of the overall structure plan of what was originally envisioned for the site. Density should be in this location where 3 train stops to town, a 3-kilometre walk into town. There's no real neighbours, or 500 metres away, well, I think they are. So there's no real objection to it. And Golden Group are actually, the owner of Golden today, are developing the whole precinct. So it all comes out in the wash in the end, because if they obviously overdevelop here, there's 4,500 dwellings allowed in the whole precinct. If they build 4 extra here, well, they've already taken out 7 around the corner. So it's already in the same mix. So
and I guess in terms of height, we really took guidance from the lead from the adjacent approval. We've been working closely with DKO, the design team behind that project as well, and understanding the feedback they've been receiving from the towns.
Just to clarify, the adjoining
3
same applicant?
Yes, same applicant,
yes.
Different design team. But I guess they were leading the charge. They were headed in first with their application. They saw the design review panel a number of times during their assessment process and beforehand. And I guess we really took the lead from the communication they were having with the town, with the design review panel, about how we might modulate height. They're a slightly different circumstance because they're the anchor of the end and we're kind of in the middle. But it was very much about, if we push down here and just do a bit of rebalancing of that height to create some variation through that precinct so that we don't end up with a big long strip of towers. So it was looking at the 19 stories, collectively 38, but we'll bump a couple of floors down. So this one's 17 and then bump a couple up on here. So it's largely the same volume, just distributed.
I think one of the stories on the smaller building gets calculated as a story because it's a communal rooftop amenities, but that's got no streetscape outcome. But technically it's another story because there is a floor of habitable space in there, but it doesn't add to density.
It adds amenity for the residents.
Just amenity, but that counts as a story.
Yep. And follow-up question on the same issue. You mentioned the structure plan, 2013, 10 years on. Yes. I think Perth has changed, aspirations have changed, and interested in your view about where this. I get the sense that the structure plan perhaps needs to be revisited, and it's a question for the town's officers, and I'll put that, whether we're in a position where the development should be viewed as more aspirational. Perhaps the local structure plan was conservative at the time.
Yes, it's a good question about the structure plan. It needs to be reviewed. It expires next year, so we're in the process of starting that process. We've had preliminary discussions with DPLH in the town about how we go about that and start that review. So we are in that process of reviewing that. The LDP was a more recent approach, which is where the 19 stories that we had regard for came from. But it's the better design outcome. Look, at the end of the day, it's probably all going to come back to traffic getting out of that precinct at one roundabout. It's got the river almost 3 sides on it. So that's going to be probably the largest driving extent. But I'm also hoping we start getting the ferry and more public transport and more people walking to town, bikes to town and things like that as well. So I think at the end of the day, this is a fantastic place for development. it's a great place for density. There's no real amenity impacts that you get in other areas in inner city locations. We should be trying to get as much out of this precinct as we possibly can.
We do have 102 bike bays for residents, so there's quite a few.
Thanks,
few
Chris.
bike bays.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this juncture from the applicant?
Sorry, can we turn our presentation off just because we can't see the people on TV?
So there is a question online. I beg
Thank
your
you.
pardon.
Thank you.
Councillor, would you like to?
Yes, please. Thanks for presenters for their further explanations. I just wanted to know, given that there is this issue with height modulation, excuse me, what that future entails in terms of the remaining buildings.
I guess that's subject to future applications, but given that there's one landowner for the whole precinct and we've started on this journey, I foresee the future there would be a continued modulation. This town's design review panel is heavily involved in the process and provide a lot of steerage in conjunction with the assessing officers. So I foresee that everything should continue running as it has been. Perhaps
the approach from the DRP was basically get two sort of bookends at each end of the race around the race course and then modulate the ones in the middle. But as to what the next ones are going to be, I don't know yet. But as I said, there's kind of 4,500 dwellings available in that whole precinct. If one drops here, it'll get picked up there, or again, if one's overdeveloped here, then it picks up. It'll be less coming out of precinct B. It's a really unique scenario where you've got one landowner developing the whole parcel.
And just and maybe a follow-up to that is, what's the inspiration for the designs, noting that this is quite complementary to the previous one? What's the design force behind that?
Yes, sorry, that red microphone doesn't mean that I can't speak. No, it's up here. Okay, sorry. I didn't say that last time. Our design was very much influenced by the site's location on the promontory as it projects out into the Swan River. And looking at how that's changed over time, I think in the set of slides I just presented, I simplified it down to a single aerial photograph, but we were tracking several different decades through looking at how the river had changed and the scalloping and the layering that the sediment had played over that time, understanding the layering that started bringing in. And then I guess we had the special opportunity on our site where we have the steward's box on the rear. So we've got this really strong horse racing connection as well. We're right on the edge of the chute where the horses all race out from. So that idea of that photo finish, how we could start staggering the undercroft spaces as a little nod to the horses and their noses as they're racing through. And really the kind of the joining of those two languages. So the river edge, the landscaping cascading over that river edge, and then the understanding of how we can start talking to the racing history on this site. We thought those were really strong driving factors. And then materialistically looking at blocks of, pale brick, textured renders, kind of reflective battens or metallic battens, picking up that setting sun, and also looking at the jockey silks. So I guess there's lots of different narrative elements we've tried to pull on to bring this one together.
You didn't mention it's quite complementary to the stadium, which I really, really appreciate. I think the design comes out quite nice. So yeah,
thank you.
Any other questions from panel members at this juncture? Thank you.
Thank you.
If not, we will have first officers from the city and then officers from WFS. Officers, if you would like to come forward, and if you can also just introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Robert Cruikshank.
Good morning, I'm Stuart McDonald.
Thank you for the opportunity. Probably also not, I think the report speaks for itself. Again, a collaborative process. I suppose I would just highlight that this was, in my mind, the thing that I recall is when this came in as a concept plan for the very first design review panel, the design review panel commented that they really just, the form, the scale of the building, the way it dealt with its relationships to its surrounds was so well considered already that there was very little for the design review panel to comment on. So while it did go to 2 DRP meetings, that's unlike most other proposals of a building of this scale and height where there'd be multiple meetings. So I think that's obviously a reflection on the quality of the design and the design team. Obviously the RAR doesn't raise issues insofar as it's a make or break issue, but it obviously just highlights that there were some matters to be considered and for the DAP to consider in terms of the height and the plot ratio, but obviously, and the density, but the town's view and the RAR is that they're all supportable. And there's no issues that manifest from the height of the plot ratio. So hence the favourable recommendation. So happy to take questions.
Thank you. Panel members, are there any questions from officers at this juncture? Yes, we have Peter Melrose online.
Hi, Rob. Just in respect of the modulation and height variations so far, what's the capacity for the town to update the structure plan, or alternatively, would that be just a matter for the landowner?
So as was flagged before, the structure plan is due for review next year. 2025 it expires. The local development plan was the more recent instrument that was adopted. That was last year. So yes, the more recent instrument last year introduced the provision for 19 stories and modulation and height. I wouldn't think it's appropriate to go and revisit the local development plan, not even having been in place for a year yet. I think it just continues to be used as a tool to guide development with discretion being exercised on it. There may be the opportunity again next year through the structure plan to further revisit the heights.
And maybe backtracking to that question I asked is, how much of the existing structure plan informed the LDP height limits? Thinking that, if that is the case, then maybe the LDP, thankfully it is due regard anyway, as is the structure plan, but does that inform it maybe in not quite correct way, I guess? Sorry, my wording's not probably the most.
The structure plan indicates a 13-storey height limit for this area. So when the local development plan was put forward, that sought obviously a variation to that, and that was on the basis that quite a different building typology was now proposed from what the structure plan contemplated back in 2013. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So yeah, the structure plan said 13 stories. We went through the process with the design review panel to determine that 19 stories was appropriate, with the provision about modulation in height. So certainly the objectives of the structure plan informed the I guess the recommendation or level of support for the 19-storey height limit. But obviously the structure plan has a different height limit to what the LDP does. So the structure plan height limit of 13 stories hasn't certainly informed our consideration of this DA. The LDP height limit has informed our exercise discretion on this DA.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions to officers at this junction?
Just probably a comment and a couple of question. Your comments around the structure plan, given there's been 2 applications recently that seem to see variation, I would think it's appropriate for that to be advanced. That's a comment. Conditions 11 and 12, which relate to affordable housing. Question is around how that's to be implemented. Has the town implemented a condition like that previously?
So conditions 11 and 12 largely reflect the provision in the LDP for delivery of affordable housing, and these same provisions, or conditions 11 and 12, were imposed upon the adjoining tower development. They were imposed by the DAP. I think it would be fair to say that I think the applicant's still working their way through to how to acquit or satisfy those conditions. So I think that's still being worked through as to how that's arrived at.
Okay, so to date, the town hasn't been involved in actually satisfying or implementing that condition?
No, we haven't had a development yet who has fulfilled those conditions. Okay. No, these conditions, it was probably the adjoining tower, the first of its kind to have this condition imposed upon it. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I have a question, and my question is about plot ratio. And I'm interested in you providing some further comment. It notes that you've disagreed with the applicant's rationale for plot ratio. The proposal, your RA does, however, support form and scale and plot ratio. So I'm interested in just elaborating a little bit further about your comments, particularly in the context of the differing opinions on your differing opinion from the applicants in terms of the rationale for plot ratio and height it refers to.
Yes, as I understand it, the applicant's position was that there is no plot ratio provision in the LDP. Therefore, they can build within the other controls that were in the LDP, whereas the town's view is that, yes, while there may be no plot ratio provision in the LDP, you still default back to the plot ratio provision which applies in the structure plan. There's a difference of maybe interpretation as to whether it's applicable or not, but either way, the report concludes that even if it were to apply, and we say it does apply, plot ratio 5:1, that in the context of the surrounding development and the future development and the building not, there's not manifesting in adverse impacts by way of height or overshadowing and other impacts on the surrounds, that we consider the plot ratio to be reasonable. And I think it'd be fair to say that when the structure plan is resolved or amended next year, that's one of the things that probably does need to be picked up on, is the plot ratio control. Similarly for the Burswood Lakes development, the nearby Mirvac development, which has buildings of similar height and scale, it went through a structure plan amendment last year, and it too had all its plot ratios increase to reflect the increase in height. So I probably should have said in my answer that, as you probably picked up from the report, is that when it went from a 13-storey height limit under the structure plan and a plot ratio of 5 under the structure plan to an LDP height limit of 19 stories, there wasn't a corresponding increase in the plot ratio, and that's why I guess we've effectively got a LDP which has allowed 6 stories of extra height, but there hasn't been a corresponding increase in plot ratio to go along with that.
And does that consideration of additional height reflect also the commentary about parking being above ground, given the nature and context of its actual location and the conditions on the area, in the area?
So do you want to answer that?
Plot ratio is included in calculation of parking, and the parking was all above ground.
Yeah, the applicant has provided justification along those lines, arguing that with the original structure plan being based on building typology that included large basement parking, that with great difficulties, geotechnical, the side effect of being quite swamp-like, and almost described it as building on toothpaste, that they've had to shift a lot of that up into the building, and that adds plot ratio.
Thank you. Those are my questions at the moment. Is any further questions at this junction? If not, we'll say thank you, officers, and we now have officers from WAPC. Come forward and introduce yourself. I do have some information in the run sheet, which you can also advise.
I'm Lena Litton, and this is Darren Lester. He is Assessing Officer of this application. The Commission's assessment of this application considered matters relevant from the regional perspective only. So our assessment was mainly concerned with the potential impacts of the application on the Swan River and the foreshore. And our recommendation is based on the conclusion that this proposal is in line with the relevant planning framework, The application had a from very early on of the town's design review, and is also in line with the recommendation of the Swan River Trust, and it is our obligation under the Metropolitan Regional Scheme to provide a recommendation in line with what they require. And therefore, we are happy to recommend this application to be approved subject to relevant conditions.
Thank you. Anything further you'd like to say? No? Panel members, do you have any questions from officers of WAPC? Yes.
Just one in relation to the adjoining development that was approved. Is it reasonable for me to assume that the conditions you're proposing were applied to the adjoining development that's been approved?
Very similar conditions, yes.
Okay. That's my question.
Any other questions at this juncture? Thank you. If there are no further questions, we will now move back to the agenda. We are going to item 3.1A, which is the recommendation is contained at the beginning of the agenda. Is there a mover of item 3.1A? Any movers for the item? It's moved Tony Aria. Is there a seconder? It is seconded Brian Curtis. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Thank you, presiding member. In terms of the planning framework, quite clearly the proposed development fits within, is capable of being approved. It is consistent with the structure plan that's been approved by both the local government and the WAPC, which has a statement of intent, which includes high and medium density development, which clearly this site the development proposes that. It also makes reference to the site being activity node, and clearly the design intent is for that to occur. More generally, I think we often, as decision makers, we deal with sites that create controversy because of the location, and this site is unique in the sense that it's isolated and it's removed from other residential uses, which would normally create some sort of amenity impact, whether it's visual, noise, traffic. So there's a unique opportunity to maximise development opportunity. I think the applicant has tried to do that, and I would commend particularly the design, and that's been reiterated by the DRP, that given the magnitude of this proposal, the variance or suggestions for change are very limited. There's been discussion about building height. My view, as I said earlier, it's an appropriate location where we can maximise height. There's also discretion for the decision maker to do that. Interestingly, the DRP didn't raise height or plot ratio as an issue, focusing more on the more qualitative elements of the design. Noting also that MIDAP has approved higher buildings on the adjoining site. In terms of the Commission's WAPC Statement of Planning Policy, residential design codes, the assessment in the RAR would indicate that most of those elements, in fact, are met and satisfied. So on that basis, I'm prepared to support the application.
Thank you. Would the seconder like to speak to the item?
Again, just to endorse what's been said, I agree with the applicant's explanation and the comments been made that this is a somewhat unique location where we can see high density and density on a site with a lot of amenity benefits. We don't have adjoining existing residents that to concern ourselves with, but the design is very well considered, and it does create what looks to me like a really nice streetscape, which when it's fully developed, I think would be a great asset to the area. I would like to say that I'm listening to what's been said about the structure plan, the LDP. I do think it's very important to have regard to those documents, but also acknowledge that there are some lapses of time, certainly from the structure plan, and different concepts of massing, which we do have to take into account. And in this location, I believe we can go to a fairly considerable height without really impacting any one or any views of significance. I like the slender towers. I like the opportunity to be able to see through to the cityscape and so on. I believe it will be a real asset to the area. I also believe that the design is very well conceived. It's very elegant, and I'm excited as to how it's going to contribute to the development of this area. So I'm supportive.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the motion at the table? Yes, Member Peter Melrose.
Thank you. Look, I just want to speak to this, and it will be a little bit similar to what others are saying, but nevertheless, the structure plan over this part of Burswood Peninsula proposes a unique redevelopment opportunity surrounding Belmont Park Racecourse and within proximity to Perth's landmark entertainment venues, and which also makes accessible approximately 2.5 kilometres of Swan River foreshore. In that context, the future for the peninsula is arguably one that is perhaps unparalleled by any high density location in Perth, particularly with it being unencumbered by the issues other areas face with height and density. It's great to see an application of this quality. As a town planner myself, I love looking at development applications, and it's also good to know that both the applicant and the town, with the assistance of the design review panel, are continuing to work well together to bring this vision to reality. Perhaps maybe that sticking point we've seen through both these applications around the height and its distribution or modulation across the site. So it'd be good to see how this is resolved in some way, whether it's through the updates to structure plans or LDPs, both of which will inevitably surpass their shelf life, and in the hope to reflect circumstances that that are changing, that relate to the property market, the realities of development feasibility, and the overwhelming need for housing that we're experiencing. On the application, the applicant has proposed a high quality design for two towers which complement the previously approved application from February, and this will contribute to a cohesive skyline, a future skyline, as the overall development evolves. And that's something the general public are likely to appreciate, in my view, and perhaps those from across the river who have raised issues in submissions may very well be appeased by once these developments are complete. And just in conclusion, the justifications provided by the applicant and the deliberations between the applicant, design review panel and the town to reach the recommendation before us are sound, and for which I largely agree. And for these reasons, I will be supporting the application.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the item? I'll just make a few comments from the proposal. The proposal is consistent with the planning framework and has already been indicated it's capable of approval. Due regard's been given to the structure plan and local development plan, and given that they are a due regard document themselves, I'm comfortable that given both time that's gone past, has passed since the initial inception of these documents, particularly the structure plan, as well as the unique location of the site and the surrounding area, the proposal in its both form and scale is appropriate. The design is excellent design, has already been cited today. And in terms of the uniqueness of the location, the proposal is consistent with the overall aims and objectives of that area, and is capable of the form that is proposed. And it also is consistent with the housing density that's being sought to achieved in this particular precinct. Overall, I think it's an excellent development for the site. Issues regarding the access parking and traffic have been acceptable in the context of the proposal and the information provided. Those are my comments. I won't make any additional comments that have already been covered today. Would the mover like the right of reply and close of debate?
Thank you, presiding member. Just probably a couple of things that I didn't mention earlier, and you raised the structure plan and the LDP are both documents, as you indicated, that in supporting this proposal, I've had due regard for, but there is discretion. I think there are valid reasons for exercising that discretion. In terms of the objections to the development, I don't think that we've ignored that, noting that the nearest residence is 500 metres away. So in terms of potential impact on residences, they're sufficiently far away that the development won't have a negative impact. So on that basis, prepared to support the proposal.
Thank you. The right of reply has been had. We are going to the vote. All those in favour? All those in favour? It is carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to the second matter. Yes, that's what I'm going to. Just a wait. Okay, well, the second item is 3.1b. Just. Members, if there are no other questions from the presenters, I will now ask for a mover of the item 3.1b, but it is the report from WAPC in relation to the same matter. Is there?
Presiding member, I'm happy to move the motion.
It is moved. Is there a seconder to the motion? It is seconded. Brian Curtis, would the mover like to speak to it?
Thank you, presiding member. Obviously, the focus of this RAR is on regional matters. The report indicates that from a regional perspective, it meets the planning framework. There's been reference earlier about a structure plan, which it meets. Some of the other design matters which are addressed in the RAR from a regional perspective don't raise any problems, and probably more importantly from a state planning policy perspective, it meets the necessary requirements. So on that basis, happy to support the RAR recommendation.
Thank you. Would the seconder like to speak to the item?
I've got nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the motion? If there are no other speakers, we move back to the mover. Do you want to reply?
Chair, no further comment.
We're now going to the vote. We are dealing with item 3.1, part C 3.1b. All those in favour? It is carried unanimously. We are now moving to item 3.2. At 3.2, we have one presenter and officers at the town. Would Mr. Nick Hiding like to? Oh, it's online, is it? We're just going to let the presenter Nick Hiding in. Nick, can you hear and see us okay?
It's just taking a minute.
Good morning, panel members. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. And see you.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I act for the John Hughes Group for this new MG dealership proposal at 2 to 10 Teddington Road in Victoria Park on the corner of Shepparton Road. This new proposal is similar in nature to the approved Kia dealership, which this panel approved approximately 12 months ago, which is currently under construction on the adjacent land at the corner of Rushton Street and Shepparton Road, which the John Hughes Group is also progressing. If approved today, the MG dealership proposal, together with the Kia dealership currently under construction, will provide a very high quality dealership precinct addressing Shepparton Road in this location, which hasn't seen any new development for many years. We've reviewed the Responsible Authority report from the Town of Victoria Park and note the recommendation for approval, which we support. We thank the town for its recommendation and a detailed report. As set out in our submission, we support the recommendation, the recommended conditions, and we are happy with the town's suggested modifications, which I believe have been circulated this morning under an alternate recommendation. So our view is to for the panel to turn to the alternate recommendation, which sets out responding to the suggested changes to the list of conditions. Other than that, we're supportive of the recommendation and the balance of conditions and look forward to a supporting decision this morning. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from panel members to this presenter? Yes, member Peter Melrosa.
Can I ask why it is a requirement or a view from the applicant that the sales yard should or would benefit from having unobstructed views from a street?
Let me just try to understand the question. Unobstructed
I
views.
can clarify for you
Yeah, go
what
ahead.
it's in relation to. There is a variation around the number of trees that would be required for this development. 28 is what's mentioned in the report, but 0 are actually proposed. And one of the justifications is around, or the discussion around it is that the land use may be disrupted by having these
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I understand now. As a vehicle dealership and having display bays, visual views to the display bays and the showroom itself is obviously very critical for the business. So proposing trees within that front setback area would obviously hamper the business and the views to those display bays. So it's very similar to what the Kia dealership was approved as. So it's much the same in that respect.
Can I then drill down to who the audience is for the for this need? I guess. I mean, if it's people in cars, can that be explained a little bit more?
Both. I mean, look, it's people visiting the precinct in general. Obviously, the John Hughes Group own and operate many other dealerships in this location, and people arrive in this area, they walk between the various dealerships, they have a look around, and so obviously visual connection to the dealerships is very important, but equally people in vehicles traversing along Shepparton Road, being able to have a look directly at vehicles on display in that area once they approach the intersection that's adjacent. They can have a quick look over and see a number of vehicles on display. I mean, that's a very beneficial part of the business, is to display those vehicles and to catch the attention of people passing by.
And maybe just the final question is, if there were trees between the development and the streetscape, between where the audience are, exactly how do you think that these trees would prevent people from, say, a person on a footpath parks, how that would be prevented, how they would be prevented from viewing what is on sale?
Oh, look, I mean, if you had really established trees with no understory, there'd be no problem, obviously. So, look, the other component, I guess, of having large trees in proximity to display bays is, you know, parts of the trees dropping on cars and birds and things like that. It's typically in a used car or a new car environment, not conducive to have trees near those display bays. But certainly in other areas, it's a possibility.
Any other questions at this juncture? Yes.
There's been obviously reference in the RAR to the issue of servicing the site and the appropriateness of having a loading bay in the adjoining street. It would, on most developments, be a requirement that would be accommodated on the site. Can you comment on your attitude to that?
Thank you for the question. There's an existing on-street loading facility in Rushton Street, which the John Hughes Group have been using for many years and currently services the site as it is right now, but also will be used in connection with the approved Kia dealership that's under construction at the moment. The existing facility there is being used for many years, will continue to be used, and the discussion we had with the town in getting vehicles moving across the two sites was to incorporate an easement for reciprocal access so that the loading can occur in Rushton Street and then vehicles can traverse the neighbouring property to arrive at this location. I understand normally it would be a requirement to have your loading on site itself. That may be able to happen in the future, but utilising the existing facility as we've done with the Kia approval, with the inclusion of the reciprocal right of access easement that we've agreed to, will be enough to accommodate the loading requirements for this development.
Are there any other questions at this juncture? I have a question to yourself, Nick. It's going to be a similar question to the officers. The report talks about specifically this loading, on-street loading, and talks about plans from the town's perspective as well as other streetscape elements. And I'd like to understand a little bit further your comments in relation to the facility operation, and where I'm really getting into is capability of the facility to operate, given the report refers to no certainty of the on-street loading being retained, and that it's the applicant's risk that the development may have no use of on-street loading. So I'd like further information from you in relation to the functioning of the proposal that's before us in the context of that comment, and particularly in relation to conditions 15 and 16 to deal with the easement.
Thank you for the question, presiding member. The group and ourselves have been aware of this potential change to the on-street loading. The town has flagged that over the years, subject to processes of public realm changes on Albany Highway at the intersection of Rushton Street and improvement works along Rushton Street. Those improvement works haven't eventuated to date, but that doesn't mean it won't happen in the future, and the group is aware that that may happen. But I guess the broader consideration for the town is that other dealerships in the vicinity also rely on this existing on-street loading bay. For example, the existing Volkswagen dealership and the Cherry dealership, which is to the east on the other corner of Rushton Street. Similarly, they don't have on-site loading facilities and rely on the continued use of the on-street loading. So I guess my point is that the town, in actioning a public realm upgrade in future, will obviously have to balance that with the impact on existing businesses in that area, and to come up with a solution that works for everybody. The town has obviously made us aware that things could change in future, and our response is that at the moment we can rely and continue to use that facility. If there's a major change in future, the subject land and this site is now party and joined to the neighbouring property as well, but in conjunction with the John Hughes Group's broader land holding, which encompasses the entire street block of Teddington, Albany Highway and Rushton Street, there is potential for manoeuvring and loading to occur on those sites in future, potentially. That might have to be subject to separate applications. But for the meantime, as approved for the Kia dealership, we are relying on the on-street loading facility. And Robert from the town may be able to expand on the planned timing of those upgrades, and that'll have to go out for consultation again, I think. So look, we'd hope that the on-street loading facility can be retained long-term and permanently, but it's really up for the town to balance those considerations.
So thank you for that. I'm separating the towns and other sites from specifically the site that's subject to this application. You talked about potentially being able to provide loading on site, on subject site, and really where I'm getting to is this site capable of operation in the absence of reliance on street loading? And that is a straight out planning concern for me about the capability to determine a proposal that, in order to operate, is reliant on the external loading on the street, given the comments and the town's comments in that respect. And your earlier comments talked about potentially you might be able to. So I was a little bit uncertain whether you are saying the site can operate in the absence of reliance on street loading, or it can't. And it's important for the consideration that I give the application before us today. Can it stand on its own 2 feet, really? That's what I'm really asking.
So the subject land of 2 to 10 Teddington Road in itself cannot operate by itself without the use of the on-street loading facility and the reciprocal access arrangements through the adjoining properties. It's not large enough. It's not hasn't got 2 access points given the closure of the access to Shepparton Road. So it does rely on the existing arrangements, and in my view wouldn't be able to be operated without it.
So it is contingent on permanent access, permanent on-street, off-site loading for the development in front of us to be operational as we see it today.
That's correct.
Based on the conditions of approval.
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm going to have the same question to the officers, because that's slightly different from what I read the application to mean, which is it can stand on its own independent of street loading it might not want to do it, but it can do it, which are fundamentally a very different question for me. I can't say it for other members, but it is a question for me. So any other comments you might want to make, Nick, I'm comfortable with, and I'll also have the same question to officers.
Well, perhaps if the officers can weigh in on that, that'd be handy.
We'll do them in a moment. Is there anything further from the panel to the current presenter before we go to officers?
Yeah. Just to follow up to that question, I'm not familiar with, you've mentioned the Kia proposal. Can you just tell us, with regard to that point that's just been raised about on-site or off-site servicing, what the situation was with regard to that site?
Thank you for the question. The Kia dealership proposal is outlined in attachment 8 and attachment 9. But very briefly, it's a very similar proposal, building at the corner with some display out the front and side access to Rushton Street, and utilising the on-street loading facility in Rushton Street, which is directly adjacent to it. And that's what's currently occurring right now. The trucks arrive, they unload or load vehicles, and then are driven to the various locations on the site, whether in their display areas or the used display areas as they are.
Thank you. Any other questions from panel members?
Presiding member, I just want a bit more clarification on the issue raised by Councillor Barossa to do with landscaping. The issue of landscaping is something that decision makers have to deal with all the time, and it's probably fair to say that similar issues against landscaping on the verges are raised by shopping centre proponents in terms of having a visual element, service stations, and notwithstanding that, there is some good planning reasons why some form of landscape needs to be installed, and plenty of precedent between the road and the property. The current site does have some form of landscaping, doesn't it, along that?
I believe it does have a small area of landscaping forward along Shepparton Road, and perhaps also on Teddington Road. I can't really note that at the moment.
Well, perhaps you don't probably need to show that, but I'd like you to expand on what makes this development unique in not providing some form of landscape.
The main aspect is the new built form adjacent to Shepparton Road. Reduced setbacks to Shepparton Road, providing a two-storey type built form at that edge, very similar to the other dealerships further along. So providing that streetscape environment. There is a landscape zone forward of the building. However, that may not be the large trees. It'll be more of a shrubs and lawn type of arrangement, so that you still have the visual aspect to the dealership front.
Any other questions at this juncture? Thank you, Nick. If there's no further questions, we will now have officers. If you'd like to come forward again, and we can you can provide some comment. Yeah. Thank you. Welcome back, officers. If you would like to provide some comment on the report, the additional documents from provided today, and any response to them that you've heard from today's discussion on this item, I'll hand over to yourselves.
Okay, thank you. I'm Robert Cruikshank.
And I'm Jonathan Woodswell.
Thank you. So obviously before you have a report with a recommendation, I suppose maybe first of all I might just talk to whether there's any queries as to why the town's recommendation doesn't already include the suggested modifications or changes that, our suggested modifications to those requested by Main Roads. And that was because, as you're probably aware, the notice of delegation instrument to local governments to determine applications on behalf of the WAPC makes reference to if the local government does not agree with the recommendation of Main Roads, then that potentially requires the determination of the application under the MRS to go to the WAPC to prepare a report to go before the DAP. So rather than go through that complicated, convoluted process, which was discussed with WAPC officers, we felt it was more appropriate just to present the recommendation before you in the RAR with the wording requested by Main Roads, but we highlight some concerns that we had around that, and we justify why those should be changed. So that's why the report follows the format that it does. In Mr. Hidding's presentation, he did obviously make reference to the conditions and said that they were generally comfortable with the conditions and those suggested modifications to those requested by Main Roads that we had made. He quite rightly pointed out, though, that the town had erred in repeating a condition twice. I think it was condition 22, where 22 and 23 repeats the same condition. So that had a consequence and knock-on effect of some of the references to condition numbers that we had included within our report and in the attachment 5 were slightly skewed or thrown out. So I thought that's why it was appropriate to just provide this document that you received today, just for greater clarity. It addresses the repetition of numbers, as well as, I guess, it indicates our suggested modifications, deletions to those requested by Main Roads. So I thought that would at least be helpful in moving forward. So I think that's the sort of one other little bit of housekeeping was that the questioning before, and Mr. Hidding's response has just highlighted for me a small error in our report, and that is at page 14, there's reference to the new tree planting requirement of Local Planning Policy 39. And on that page, we correctly refer to the total requirement of new trees as 9 medium trees. However, in the following page, page 15, we make reference to the Local Planning Policy new tree requirement is 26 trees. That's incorrect. The 26 trees, as I recall, was for the adjoining development. So just to be clear, it's 9 medium trees required for this development based on its lot size. So I suppose if I then talk to the issues that have been raised in the questions, as has been pointed out, yes, there is existing loading, unloading bays which exist on Rushton Street in obviously close proximity of the site. I might just also point out that there are actually loading and unloading bays on another street somewhat further, but not completely distant. That's on Twickenham Street, which is a few streets further to the west, I would say. So yes, the John Hughes Company, and particularly the dealerships and car yards that have been operating from this existing street block have relied upon the on-street bays in Rushton Street for some time. The town is contemplating a public realm upgrade works, potentially at the corner of Albany Highway and Rushton Street. And in the town's previous dealings with the Kia dealership application, there was concerns expressed around the impact of those public realm works on the on-street loading bays in Rushton Street, in that it may require the on-street loading bays to be removed, or even if the on-street loading bays were to be retained, the works that are proposed at the corner of Albany Highway and Rushton Street, the design outcome may be compromised by having to take into account the geometry of the movement of trucks at the intersection. So The issue was flagged then that as part of the Kia dealership that consideration should be given to on-site loading. Now, ultimately, the view was taken for that application that the bays are existing, they've existed on street for some time, and that if there is to be any changes to those, then there potentially would be the opportunity for the loading, unloading to happen on the site of the Kia dealership. If you look at, again, it's in attachment 8, I think it was, that Mr. Hidding mentioned. Attachment 8, yeah. It's on page 898 of the agenda documents. You can see that there is a Kia dealership on the very corner there, but there's also a lot of display bays, which would have the opportunity to potentially be converted into loading bays. So it was felt, the town's view was, it was felt that if the on-street loading bays needed to be removed, then that may force the hand of John Hughes to provide some on-site loading bays. With the new proposal for the corner of Twickenham Street, I guess the same issue arises. Unlike the Kia dealership, where obviously the Kia dealership is directly adjacent to Rushton Street, so a vehicle would be unloaded and driven straight onto the site. In this instance, if a vehicle was to be unloaded on Rushton Street, one alternative would be for the vehicle to be unloaded and potentially be unlicensed, and it would have to drive down maybe Rushton Street, Shepparton Road and Teddington Road to get to the subject site. It was felt that that wasn't appropriate. So the more appropriate course of action, which is why this application has taken some time, is the applicant sought to secure legal rights of access over the adjoining property. The property is subject to the Kia dealership approval. So now, having secured the approval of the landowner for an easement over the Kia dealership land to get access to the MG land, the town's view was still that if the on-street loading bays on Rushton Street are to be removed, then through securing a legal right of access over the Kia land, that would still facilitate the ability to, there would be the ability for on-street loading to occur. If you were to look at a plan, I believe if you look at a plan which was to transpose the MG dealership DA and the Kia dealership DA2, the access arrangement largely aligns, maybe with some modifications, but we felt comfortable that, again, that if the on-street loading bays on Rushton Street were to be removed, that there is capacity within the Kia dealership land and the MG land for on-site loading to occur. So I suppose to answer the earlier question that if you look at the MG dealership land, the subject list DA in its own right and without consideration of the adjoining land, then I would agree that the loading, unloading would not work on site on the MG dealership land only. But as I say, we have a pre-existing loading, unloading arrangement on Rushton Street, and even if that were to be removed, we were satisfied that there is the capacity for that to be accommodated within across the two sites.
Is there anything further you wish to say?
I have to answer questions.
Thank you. We're going to questions from the panel. I will lead with my question that I spoke about earlier. Can you clarify for panel, particularly for myself, my understanding from the presentation earlier, which is not the understanding I had from reading the RA, is, and it's been clarified now from the presenter earlier, that this proposal before us is reliant on-street loading permanently essentially being retained, and it's not capable of on-site loading. Now, that can be corrected from the Dick Hiding if he wishes, but that was my understanding of what I heard, which is somewhat different to how the report reads, which reads that it's acceptable to use on-street loading, but in the event the town wants to develop the site, on-site loading still facilitates the development as we are currently seeing, i.e. a change of building location as well as continued use for the site for vehicle sales. That is not what I thought I heard a few moments ago from Nick Hiding. So can you provide some comments in relation to the reliance and permanency of the on-street loading, one, and two, the comments that have been previously made that the site doesn't work in its current form as a proposal for us without on-street or being required to have on-site loading. I don't know if I've complicated the question, but I'm trying to unpack how reliant the development is for us.
I'll just say first, I thought I may have clarified that, and I'll also say that if the RAR gave a different impression, then I apologise for that, but I'll let Jonathan maybe speak.
Yeah, so the development as it stands is reliant on the on-street loading and unloading to essentially traverse through the Kia dealership lot with rider carriageway easement onto the subject lot. In the event that the town does remove the on-street loading, then there will be an onus on the applicant for that to occur on site at the Kia dealership. So they'll likely have to relocate and modify a number of those sales bays for that to occur, but it can occur at a future date. They just don't currently have an on-site loading and unloading bay on the Kia site. I'll also make the point that loading can occur on the Teddington Road one, just not with their current car carriers. If they use a different type of trailer to essentially fit on the site and not have cross-through traffic. So their current car trailers have about 4 cars on them and they're quite long, but there's no real reason why they have to keep on using those.
Okay. Is there any other questions? I'm going to probably cycle back to this one in a minute, but
it was sort of a question about understanding what the development application relates to. It doesn't relate solely to lot 3. Is it lot 3?
Lot 3 and lot 92, yeah, the corner lot, yeah.
Okay, so the redevelopment, is it only on lot 3? Does it include anything to do with lot 2?
Lot 3 and lot 92 is a subject to the development application. Yes, so the building works and the landscaping, etc., occur on lot 3 and lot 92.
On both lots?
Yep, correct.
Okay, so there are works proposed within lot 92.
Yes, double check again, but yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes, that's correct. The showroom building actually encroaches over the boundary of lot 3 and 92. Yeah.
Okay. Then the follow-up question was really around Main Road's position and their requirement to close the access on Albany Highway, which is obviously the town doesn't support, obviously the applicant doesn't support. So the current proposal is to retain that access on Albany Highway.
So there's some confusion, largely through naming conventions, I think, of main roads. So main roads have referred to, as I understand it, they've referred to Shepparton Road as Albany Highway.
They have, yes. Main roads have their own categorisation where they refer to the whole thing. In actual fact, it's Shepparton Road, but they categorise the whole lot as Albany Highway because at a certain point it joins Albany Highway further up, so.
Yeah, so while you're correct in making reference to Main Red's comments in reference to Albany Highway, their intent is for the access crossover on Shepparton Road to be closed. There's no dispute from the applicant or us about that.
And that does make sense because it's classified as a other major highway.
Right.
Under the Metropolitan Region scheme.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this juncture? Yes.
We were referring earlier to the issue of landscaping on the Shepparton Road frontage and the applicant's desire to have cars there to be seen from the street. Can you just clarify, given that the adjoining development, what would have been great if we've got the whole site plan, because I'm cycling between two. But a decision was made around display vehicles and its relationship to the landscaping on the adjoining site. Can you just comment on the extent to which that impacts positively or negatively to the way you've viewed landscaping on this site and the display of vehicles?
Yeah, so effectively for the neighbouring Kia site, so when the application initially came in, had no landscaping, and that was all display bays. And through negotiations with the applicant, ultimately we didn't reach an outcome. They wanted to retain the display bays. The town recommended a condition that a portion of that area be landscaped, so a compromise solution, providing them some display bays, probably about 4, with the rest being landscaping, which we felt was a balanced approach between landscaping and the use of the site to display to Shepparton Road. The DAP did apply that condition, and what the current proposal is essentially replicates and provides a mirror image of the neighbouring approval in terms of landscaping and the balance of display bays.
So it's broadly consistent. Your approach is broadly consistent.
Yeah. Broadly, and just to add to that, I think as I flagged, correcting some administrative errors, that had a new tree planting requirement of 26 trees, and the DAP on that occasion was prepared to waive that requirement. This application would otherwise require 9 medium trees.
Okay.
Any other questions? The beginning of Oh, sorry. Would you like to speak? Sorry, Peter
happily be last. Just to Robert and the town, how has the town considered its urban forest strategy, inclusive of its 20% canopy target, in its assessment of this application, and obviously in respect of the variations to the requirement of the 9 trees and of the overall tree canopy actually that's in this precinct, which is pretty low?
I think it'd be fair to say that we haven't directly considered the urban forest strategy, the town's urban forest strategy, but the town's urban forest strategy informs the provisions in the local planning policy 39 for new tree planting. So we've assessed the application against the relevant local planning policy that's informed by the urban forest strategy.
And just maybe a follow-up question to that, mate. It's a procedural question to the chair. I want to foreshadow an amendment to this, but because I've not done one actually before, can you just let me know when I can do that?
Amendments are dealt with once a motion's on the table. You can deal with an amendment at that point.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that when that happens. Cheers.
Any further questions? I'm going to cycle back to an earlier question, which is one of application. There's a number of sites that are connected to this proposal. I note that the conditions refer to lots 3 and 92. They also refer further down in the easements in relation to lot 92, lot 8 and lot 67. Does the, and I can't find fast enough the application form, does it include all lots the subject of this proposal?
Yeah, so I'll speak to
Yes,
this.
go.
So I think essentially because we did work with the applicant quite hard to get an easement across the neighbouring lots, because the neighbouring lots then became subject to the application, which is the Kia lots, they needed their own forms essentially sent through, so they have their own DAP application forms as part of this. So essentially, the DAP will only be approving the easement over those lots, and the other lots refer to where the development's occurring.
Yeah, we got the certificate titles in here, but I don't, unless I've skipped over it, I couldn't see the application.
I presume that's what was submitted with the original application, at which time there was no right of carriage or easement proposed, and through the development application process, the right of way access easement has been secured. But and as mentioned, the application form has now been submitted for those other lots. But the applicant's planning report, I think where the certificates of title are included, is still the original planning report, hasn't been updated to include the certificate of titles for the other lots now.
Okay. So in terms of the preamble to either the recommendation in the RA or the recommendation in the alternate, so let me quickly get back to it. I'm just wanting to make sure how that is covered. The preamble only refers to the development application number.
Correct.
And not reference to specific lots.
Yep.
In. That's my question. Are there any further questions?
Presiding member, I do have one further in relation to main roads, and there's confusion about what Albany Highway is. There is a widening requirement on Shepparton Road, correct?
Correct.
Which is what main roads refer to as Albany Highway.
Correct.
Is that widening requirement outside this development, or the development within the road widening?
I can speak on that. So Main Roads have recommended a condition essentially for a separate lot to be created for future acquisition by them. So that's effectively the road widening area. And when Main Roads essentially has budget, they purchase those. Normally and more correctly, that's done as part of a subdivision amalgamation process, not a development application process. So as a condition of approval, we've recommended amalgamation, and so is Main Roads. And at that point, that separate lot will be created. So it's kind of an order of operations thing.
Yeah, I understand that component. It was more about, so if we look at the development plans,
yeah,
the car parking, is that within the road widening requirement?
No. So I'm not sure which. If you're looking at the development plan, have we talked to a drawing number maybe?
Yeah, I'm looking at A01.
Yeah. A01, yeah. So at the top of A01, it is probably a little bit hard to see, but there's an orange dotted line that sits. I think you can see where the 5 new display bays are. You see that?
Yeah.
And just to the top of that, there's an orange dotted line that runs from right to left, left to right. That's the road widening. That shows the line of the road widening, the orange dotted line.
Yeah, I don't see that on. It's not on this. So that's on A01. A01. Rev A.
To look again, sorry.
A02. Okay, that's what it is.
Rev B, sorry. Rev B.
Okay.
So to answer the question, the display bays are within the private property. Should the widening, or if and when the widening occurs, all that is happening in the reserved land for widening is an existing footpath and verge landscaping.
Okay.
Any further questions? I have a question regarding your RA recommendation and the alternate recommendation. Alternate recommendation has made some modifications to some of the requested provisions from main roads. Your RA recommendation includes them in there, and your earlier comment about not wanting to have dual application. You provide some comments in relation to that comment, as well as what we now have in front of us, which is a RA recommendation with a series of conditions and alternate with a number of those now removed that relate to main roads position.
So sorry, I thought, again, there's an instrument of delegation as to what the local government can determine on behalf of the WAPC under the MRS. One of the things it talks about is that if the local government does not agree to the recommendation of main roads, then it requires a separate determination by the WAPC under the MRS. There were some questions around, does that mean just where you don't agree with the recommendation to approve or refuse, or does that mean that you may not agree with the wording of conditions recommended by main roads, even though we are in alignment and agreement with the recommendation for approval? We had some differences of opinion on the wording of the conditions. So to not enliven that issue, and main roads and the WAPC didn't want to enliven that issue, we felt it was appropriate to present our report with main roads conditions as worded, and we would provide commentary on those conditions that we agreed with or didn't agree with or thought should be deleted. So the report and attachment 5 were intended to do that, to provide the commentary on what we agreed with and what we didn't agree with. And then the additional document that you provided today was intended to just assist you in visually seeing what that looks like, what the recommended modifications that we have suggested, and also picking up on the fact that we had repeated a condition, what that now looks like. So that's what's presented before you, and maybe it's a subtlety, but it was intended that this is not an alternative officer's recommendation.
Okay.
This is just for your information, really, to make it clear to you. I didn't want to present it as an alternative recommendation, which again would bring that issue up of.
That's what I'm getting
So
at, yes.
sorry. Okay. Yeah.
That's what I thought you had given us.
No, I didn't. I'd never called it an alternative recommendation. Sorry, subtleties. It wasn't intended to be that.
Sorry, for clarification. So DAP is stepping into the shoes of local government as a decision maker. So are you saying that if we were not to accept the position of main roads, it requires a WAPC decision?
No, I don't believe the decision. Yeah, I don't know.
Additional responsible authority report.
I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's been some, maybe it has come up before. No. Yeah, I can't answer. I can tell you what I think happened before, but I'm not going to put that on the table today.
My understanding has been that there's been where the recommendation follows the agency, in this case main roads, then it's now to be determined where it's inconsistent with that. Comments on that inconsistency essentially come from main roads. So the question then is, the question that we're grappling with is, are we lacking information to make a determination that removes main roads conditions as written in the absence of a report from main roads, or WAPC, I should say. That becomes a question that I'm not sure I can answer.
Yeah, I think the issues come up before, and maybe the DAP Secretariat have sought their own in-house legal advice on it. I think I'd be fairly confident in saying that there would be instances before where a report's come before the DAP with recommended conditions from main roads, and the DAP on instances would have amended or modified those conditions without requiring it to go off on a separate pathway to WAPC. but I'm just giving you my understanding, whether you wish to get your own legal advice to clarify.
Yeah. Presiding member, my difficulty with this is that it does, the delegation notice, probably because it abuts the other major highway reservation. And as you point out, if we're not supporting Main Road's position, I'm somewhat uncomfortable that we haven't got definitive advice to enable us to make that decision. And you think it may have occurred before, and you're probably right.
Yeah, probably, but yeah.
Okay, well, perhaps that's something for the panel to consider.
And as I understand it, this is a general comment based on what you've provided us today, Robert, is that the RA recommendation in the report, excluding the duplication, includes Main Road's conditions.
It's as per Main Road's conditions, yes.
That's my understanding. The question starts getting out if we're starting to remove them.
Which we have recommended some be removed, yes. Yes. And some be modified.
Presiding member, am I able to speak on this or not?
Sorry, who's that?
Mr. Hitting.
Oh, Nick, yes, you can. Yes, by all means, you can speak, yes.
The panel has consistently and many times before considered Main Road's conditions as they are in recommendations and have deleted them at their discretion. It doesn't require then the Planning Commission to be involved. This has happened many times. You know, access to highway where Main Roads have said no access to the highway, but then the panel on balance of issues have considered that access is appropriate and have approved development with access. It's happened many times on other development proposals. So my view is that there's nothing standing in the way of this panel making a decision today even if conditions of approval are being deleted that are Main Road's base conditions. The DAP has the power and discretion to move forward.
Nick, you say that, but is it in the context of the delegation that Rob's talked about? I have been involved in plenty of DAPs where the view of Main Roads has not completely been accepted, but we're talking about a formal delegation notice.
Yes, so at the time the town makes a recommendation, if the town says, no, we're not accepting the advice of Main Roads and we're putting up a recommendation that doesn't align with Main Roads, it's at that point that the Planning Commission have to be referred the application and it becomes a dual RAR reporting application. But the town, in this case, have simply accepted the advice of Main Roads, added the conditions verbatim to the recommendation, so that delegation issue has not been enlivened. So it's been a single RAR, it's not become a dual RAR, and it's open for the DAP to consider conditions as they are. Now that the town separately in its report has discussed those issues, but the recommendation itself in front of you includes the Main Roads conditions as they are verbatim. So that keeps the delegation issue in line and doesn't enliven the dual RAR reporting situation.
Thank you for those comments. I know we've definitely dealt with others, but I'm trying to think whether they've been dual applications. Let's pick my question, I think. Okay, panel members, is there any other questions? If there are no questions, we are moving back to the panel. We have a recommendation that is contained in the RAR. The other material was just information, it wasn't an alternate. Is there a move of the recommendation as contained in the RAR, noting that as has been provided today, condition 22 and condition 23 in the RAR are duplicate? Is there a mover of the RA recommendation?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think Councillor Melrose dropped out of the meeting and he's trying to be allowed back.
Thank you for that. Welcome back. We're just going to the, did you have anything else you wanted to ask before we go to the motion?
No, I don't.
Okay, so we'll just, I don't know when you dropped out and what you heard. We're going to the recommendation in the RA, recognising that the additional material that was provided to us today is just information, it's not an alternate. And there is a duplication of condition 22 and 23. Is there a mover of the RA recommendation as written?
I'm happy to move, but I also want to put up an amendment.
Are you moving it with, or are you moving it excluding one of the duplicate conditions?
No, that's not. Well, I could if you wanted to.
No, that's okay. Move as you wish. What are you? You're moving the RA recommendation. Yep. And
I'd like to add an extra condition, and maybe it'd be up for discussion on how this could be done.
What I would suggest that happens then is that we need a seconder for the RA recommendation as written, and then we deal with everything else as amendments. We've got a mover, Peter Melrose. Is there a seconder for the item for the RA recommendation? I will move the seconder as seconder for the continued discussion. Over to the mover.
So can I propose that amendment?
Yes, amendment 1 it is.
Okay, so I'd like to somehow fix this issue with the trees that I've raised earlier. Can I speak to it? Is that how this is done?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Sorry.
okay.
So what you need to do is, so the process from this point is that when you move or recommend an amendment, you need to tell us what the amendment is, and then you can we'll get a seconder to it, and then you speak to it. So what's your amendment?
Okay, so the amendment is that the applicant and the town work together to accommodate the 9 trees that are required through the policy but aren't proposed, either within the precinct, because acknowledging that it probably can't be all done on the one site, or this is not my preference, but elsewhere in the town, as per whatever the town deems to be appropriate. And I believe in the policy there's some room for that to occur. It just doesn't seem to be a part of this particular application or any of the conditions.
Okay, do you want to speak, just explain your rationale, and then we'll get a second.
Yeah, look, I just want to express my disagreement with the town's assessment of the justification where the proposals vary in this particular matter. The land use, which is an X use, is enjoying non-conforming land use rights, and it is appearing to prevent the town from achieving other objectives such as tree canopy in the area. And that is clearly lacking in this area, and for which it represents a key gateway into the town, and perhaps more importantly into the heart of the city proper. The position from the town, and perhaps from the applicant by proxy of its design for us, is that substantial landscaping and tree planting may be detrimental to the proposed use and related visibility to the site. And I'd like to argue that the visibility of the complex is already well established through the sheer size of the car sales precinct and the time it's had to exist on the site, some 50 years. To expand on this is perhaps an additional argument that people driving past, for whom the notion that visibility from the street is attributed to, probably shouldn't be window shopping from their cars anyway. And such an action should not be encouraged through unbridled visibility that this proposal seeks and the overall complex for which the overall complex exhibits. In addition, when the applicant has sought several variations to signage that exceeds what is required, only minor but still exceeding, it only serves to reinforce that the visibility is more than accommodated for, and perhaps a more balanced approach should be sought by us as the decision maker, one which places potential increased amenity for other street users, such as pedestrians, over the desire for advertising of the business. The discretion to be sought amounts to 9 medium trees, or 35 if we were to include the previous application as well. That would otherwise contribute to the town's tree canopy cover, and for the precinct, which arguably has none or very little. It also appears that this requirement, and it's a bit frustrating, but it's been foregone, and there is no alternative of how the 9 trees could be accommodated for, whether as part of this proposal or through some other mechanism. And the policy does show in there that there is a capacity for us to seek these trees elsewhere, whether that's on the site or on the verges or elsewhere in the town. The previous Kia development was quoted, and it was also attached in this, and uses a justification for the assessment of this particular element of the proposal before us. Whether the application before us is consistent with the previous DAP decision is perhaps not the basis by which I think we should be viewing or assessing this proposal. That decision actually resulted in 100 metres of streetscape leading into Perth and the gateway to Vic Park without a single tree and no shade whatsoever, which is arguably a hostile environment for anyone who's wishing to use that particular street. And I would think that that would actually have the effect of deterring people from using the street or even window shopping for the cars that are on display. And a treed or shaded experience on that footpath is arguably a better outcome, and is one that is in accordance with the future vision that, for this precinct, and for which the town has many strategic goals around. I'm not sure if the panel members or anyone who is listening is aware of the Melville Mazda dealership on Canning Highway. There's a significant gum tree at that development, and it was retained when they upgraded the car sales yard. And that tree absolutely adds a lot of value, amenity value to that area. And I would argue at a point in design, at this point in the design, particularly before anything's constructed, that you can actually design things with trees in mind. And we're at the stage now, or maybe we're slightly past it, but we certainly could have been thinking about this as this proposal began. Where am I going with this? I think, well, obviously it could have been thought about before, and doing so would actually complement the built form, and it would actually manage the visibility and maintenance issues that Mr. Keating raised earlier when I was asking my questions. So yeah, look, that's the justification really, and I think it would be as simple as having a condition in there somewhere that just says, look, if the trees can't be accommodated on this particular part of the development, that the John Hughes complex is large enough that I'm sure 9, or if they were feeling, a little bit more excited about the trees, could actually accommodate the Kia trees that weren't included either. There you go, that's it, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we do need a seconder for continued discussion on this. Is there a seconder? It is seconded. It is seconded Lindsay Miles. Is it Miles or Mills? Would you like to speak to the item? To the amendment, beg your pardon, Amendment 1, we're dealing with trees.
Nothing much to add. I think Peter Marosa covered it pretty well. We have a big strategy of increasing canopy cover in the town, and I can't really understand why this development shouldn't have to plant trees if other developments do. I guess I can't imagine that someone wouldn't buy a car because there was a tree on a property. So I feel putting 9 trees in would be a good opportunity to reduce some of the heat island effect and increase amenity in the area.
Thank you. Any other speakers on Amendment 1? Yes, Amendment 1 is a new condition. Is a new condition to add for an additional 9 trees to be provided on site or with agreement of the city in the precinct or in the surrounding area. Has that captured the thrust of your condition? Is there any other speakers on Amendment 1? I'll speak to the condition. I do understand and agree with the sentiment of the condition. I have a view that the condition 5 that's provided in here regarding a detailed landscaping plan would capture predominantly the information, and I suppose whilst I accept it's a new application, elements of the layout, particularly those along Albany Highway, are not substantially changing. The main change is where the intersection of Teddington and Shepparton Road is with the built form in that location, with the Albany Highway frontage having limited change, and the plans indicate that there is a landscaping strip continuing on there, continuing to be maintained on there. So I do have some reservations in relation to a new condition. Any other comments on the motion? Oh, sorry, on the amendment, Amendment 1? If not, we go to the mover for right of reply.
Yeah, just one thing. I think just the landscaping that is proposed in the landscaping site, it will ultimately be affected potentially by any road widening. So, you know, anything that does happen in that space ultimately is under threat. I think Lindsay makes a good point that I didn't bring up about urban heat islands, and I think if we were to do some data measurements around this particular precinct, that land use is going to be contributing significantly to the added heat in the area. And, you know, like part of this application, there's 7 or so palm trees being removed, and they're not even deemed to be a tree. And I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, like even if we're removing something like that, but not actually adding anything else, it's gravely concerning. You know, like I think large developers really do have an obligation to be doing what everyone else is asked to do. I mean, at a residential level, this sort of stuff you don't get through this without providing, you know, your landscaping obligations. So, and I would argue that, you know, if you get the landscaping right, this will add immense value to the precinct, to the land use, and the ability to draw customers in and for them to enjoy the space when they're actually there. I mean, look, I don't know exactly what the answers are in terms of where we could plant trees for this site, but I think what we're hearing on another matter about, you know, the access and loading, that there is a little bit of a lack of strategy around how this development is being advanced, given that it is like an X use as well. I think, you know, that it's fine to have the non-conforming use rights and then provide upgrades to buildings to ensure you've got, you know, economic certainty and viability, but that should come with, you know, some other obligations around, well, what are you doing to counteract some of the negative impacts, of which the reason why that X use actually exists is because of those kind of things. So, you know, I would very much, you know, encourage the applicants to really consider how they can actually add value to the landscaping in the town of Vic Park, having, you know, the word park in its name. And we've got some really great parks nearby to this development, and we've got a lot of spend coming from the state government. It'd be really great to see that kind of match from the private sector as well. And I don't mean, maybe I'll get a chance to actually close the other point anyway, because I actually moved the motion. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Well, I'll save that bit till then, but thank you.
Thank you. Debate has been closed on Amendment 1. All those in favour? Against? is carried 3-2. The mover, would you like to continue discussion?
Well, as long as no one else has anything to say, I just want to, close it off, really. Is that okay?
No, everybody else has to debate the substantive motion.
Ah, okay. No, I don't have anything more to say. No, thanks.
As a seconder, I'll speak to the motion. I think the development's a good and appropriate development on the site in the context of the RA provided. I have some reservations, as has already been expressed today, in relation to the extent to which modifications occur of main roads. I think it's reasonable that the matter be determined and dealt with. It can be dealt with today, and I'm comfortable with the conditions that are listed in the agenda. I am moving an amendment for the minute taker. It is Amendment 2. The Amendment 2 is essentially deletion of condition 23, and then the remaining conditions to be renumbered as it is, and the reason it's being moved to be deleted, if there's a seconder, is it's a deletion, it's a duplication of an existing condition, and that's condition 22. So that's my motion number 2. Is there a mover for is there a seconder for Amendment 2?
Presiding member, I'll have it to.
It is seconded. Tony Harris. As I say, I've already given you my reason. Would you like to speak to the amendment?
I don't think I need to add anything. It's an administrative error. That's.
Any other speakers on Amendment 2? I have there's no further speakers. We go back to right of reply. There is no right of reply. Moving straight to the vote. Amendment 2 for deletion of condition 23 and renumbering of the remaining. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I move back to the agenda. I am comfortable with the development. I think, as I've already indicated, the developments are used that can be approved on the site. The information is provided in the RA. There is the site has been, as indicated in the information, substantial. It's been on site. The use has been on site for a substantial amount of time and is fairly well known in that local area. The development incorporates significant changes to a portion of the site, but principally where the predominant vehicles are displayed still retains its open nature, as well as retaining the landscaping strip along that side. From the clarification that's been provided today, which is relation to the on-street loading, the clarification has been that on-street loading is provided, but the additional conditions regarding the modifications and easements and growths would facilitate the on-site loading because of these two conditions, and they are condition 15 and 16, and they have capability of ensuring that the loading can occur, as well as it may require smaller vehicles. So it is capable, from what I have heard today, for loading to occur on site, enabling the development to be approved without reliance on the loading in the street. A number of the comments in relation to main roads, at this juncture, I'm not seeking to modify those. There are a couple of matters that I'm comfortable to change. So my next condition is essentially, my next amendment, I am making an amendment because it is, it's Amendment 3, because it is small. And it is condition 21. It's being modified to remove the word building permit and to change it to occupancy. So that is modification of condition 21, changing only one word from prior to issue of building permit, prior to issue of occupancy permit. So again, that's from the reasons for that change is it's reasonable that the associated works occur prior to occupancy. There's a number of matters that need to occur in order to get the building permit up, as well as a number of matters that relate to that condition that are appropriately dealt with through the process, and as long as they're dealt with prior to operation. There's a seconder for that.
Presiding member, I'll second that.
It is seconded. I don't have any other comments to make. Would the seconder like to speak to it?
No, thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak to Amendment 3? There's no other speakers to Amendment 3. I'll go straight to the vote on Amendment 3. All those in favour? Against? Well, it's carried unanimously. At this junction, those are my comments on the proposal, as well as any modifications. I move back to the panel. Is there any other speakers on the motion in front of us?
I'm prepared to support the current motion, albeit I think there's some difficulties with conditions 18 to 25. I know there's been some discussion about deleting those conditions. I'm, however, concerned that the delegation notice presents some difficulties for this panel, because the panel is stepping in the shoes of the local government. Delegation notice doesn't, I'm quite pretty sure about this, it doesn't make reference to recommendations. It actually talks about decision makers. So if this panel was to make a substantial change which would oppose Main Road's recommendations, given the site abuts reserve land, I think that would be problematical. So I'm sure the applicant's not going to be satisfied with the inclusion of those 5 conditions, because it's going to present some significant impediments. But I don't know that this panel, well, I'm not convinced that this panel has the capacity to delete those conditions. So yes, I will support the current motion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the motion on the table? Yes.
I'd just like to add that I too have some reservations around the way the Main Roads proposed changes to the Main Roads recommendations have been presented to us. So I support the view that I'd prefer to stick with the RAR recommendations, subject to the modifications we've just gone through.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the motion? We move back to the mover. You have right of reply and close of debate.
Okay. I'm comfortable with where we've reached so far. I've made a couple of points around tree canopy and a brief touching on the loading, unloading, lacking a bit of an overall strategy there. But I think while car-based uses are not, in my view, or I don't think it's even perceived in the future of this precinct to continue forever, the proposal before us does represent a gradual shift towards a better built form outcome for Shepparton Road and surrounds. And that built form really does address the streetscape in a more attractive way than what currently exists, which is obviously a win. Over the last few years, this complex has improved visually through several modifications and updates to the buildings and the way the site operates. Maybe perhaps a bit slower than what I would like to see, and with far less greenery, as I've pointed out. But nevertheless, I look forward to seeing how this precinct evolves, particularly with an extra 9 trees. And on the basis of my discussion points, I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you. The debate has, right of pipe and having debate has now been completed. We are going to the motion. The substantive motion is the RAR recommendation at the beginning of the report, inclusive of the 3 amendments that have been carried. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously for the minute taker. We move back to the agenda. That completes the items. There are no Form 2 applications. There are no the SAT reconsideration items. The information regarding the SAT appeals and Supreme Courts, I have no comments on those. They're for noting. There is no general business. I'm assuming, does anybody have any general business?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, there is one.
I think it's general.
General
Look,
business.
this one was quite a massive agenda, 1,200 pages. Is there a way that this can be split up? It's absolutely incredible how long some of these pages will load when you're in your PDF. I'm not sure if this has been brought up before. I'm sure it has, and I don't have the solution. I just think like it's actually really difficult to look at and scroll through these documents.
I haven't got any comments that I can make on that. I'll take it as general business and we'll pass it through to the MIDAP Secretariat in relation to agenda size and the ability to load the material.
Thank you.
Is there any other comments for general business? If not, we move to closure of meeting. Meeting is formally closed at 12:41 p.m.